trust funds.
I understand correctly, Mr.
On raising long-term debt and diversifying the holdings of Roscom and the reliance on Roscom as the banker.
I mean, we've been seeking financing, and I have over the past 10 years been seeking third-party financing for the ventures I've started up, and certainly in this case, it was no different. We've had an ongoing process led by a very experienced team at OT, led by Aldo, and on my side, by Bryce, to investigate a variety of financing alternatives, equity and debt. And of course, as Aldo stated earlier, Roscom is not at all in the banking business. So this is as a result of incredible global circumstances that I don't think anyone could have seen coming, that we've ended up in the situation we're in.
I think it's very important to understand that this is not our interest. You know, we're a public company. We have shareholders. They don't want us to have so much money tied in. You know, we use, as I said in my statement, others. You know, we leverage other people's money. So we just went into this situation because of the markets. You know, we have. You know, our intention is to reduce as much as we can our financial exposure because this is not our business, and we just put in this situation because of the global crisis. And so we have a very, very, very clear. We're very clear on this. As much as we can reduce, this is in our interest.
What's very
Can I just, Mr. Katz, to be very specific to the question that you asked, which is about a clock. In my experience, and I think that we're quite aligned on this end, all the shareholders, when you put a financing condition on a financing or on an entity that's looking for money, it becomes the lowest common denominator. So immediately, if there's a clock, we will be held hostage either pre or at the time of that clock being put on. And we have, people have raised financings under constraints before and would I think agree with me. In the existing constraints that we have had to work our way through, an example would be the Industry Canada approval. I mean, that was the leading conversation in every financing discussion. You can guess what the current leading financing question is in every conversation that we're having now. And if we walked out of here and the hypothetical 1 year, you need X, or dictation to capital structure, that will be the leading question and will put us in a very, very tight box.
We've said, Mr. Vice Chairman, publicly and a number of times that we must have the ability to raise capital on commercial terms, and an imposition of any kind of constraint timeline, frankly, a timeline even that were extended out a period of time, will really result in, of course, given the nature of this hearing being on the public record, you will actually, in many ways, defer our ability to have financing alternatives till about 30, 60 days before we have to close on that financing. So we've got a long history of raising third-party capital, and this business is no different for us. We're working hard to make that a reality.
And I guess we'll have to wait till tomorrow to get into what it is you're actually doing and who you're talking to. But let me just ask one follow-up question. That is, you're also looking for long-term capital with the best, lowest rates you possibly can. At the same time, the rates you're paying right now are market rates, as you say, LIBOR plus whatever, the 18% or whatever. So it begs the question, in the interim, are you saying there's nobody on Wall Street, there's no one internationally that would take short-term paper at these rates?
Mr. Katz, again, we're talking to the banking community daily, I can say pretty comfortably. The post-crisis, any type of new entrant, spectrum secured, short or long-term bridge or longer-term financing died. That market, to my knowledge and to the feedback that I've still been getting, has not come back. And we will have, as you know, bankers in the room tomorrow to talk somewhat to that.
If I may add, Mr. Katz, in addition to that, my experience, and it's echoed by many people who've done this, is that until the company is in service and has traction in the market, has subscribers, generates revenues, it's extremely difficult to raise external funding. External funding from public institutions, from private equity investors, is not funding that is able or willing to take on the entrepreneurial risk that you deal with in a startup phase, pre-launch, pre-subscribers.
Fortunately, I think in this...
on the risk of... this is Naif on the risk of being repetitive, I need again to emphasize and repeat. In the absence of a final regulatory approval, any lender needs to be half as crazy as we are.
Okay. So that begs the question, if we continue on without getting any long-term funding, we come up with a clause that's in your term agreement that has a definitive date on it for when default arises. Is that right?
That is correct. There is a maturity date on the facility.
I mean, obviously, as ORSCOM, as we are a minority shareholder, and we have put, as you know, a substantial amount of money. It's not in our interest to do anything to ignite this clause. That's obvious. So we have to put terms, but it's not in our interest.
It's some of those terms, though, that I want to pursue. You have terms in there with regard to, I think that the clause is actually 7.2, and it's called appropriation of monies. And I need to get a better understanding as to what recourse or ROSCOM has set aside as part of its alternatives should the term loan be called, and what happens to the operation at that point in time. Because it appears as though an awful lot of things get triggered at that point in time, not the least of which is a technical services agreement, which also falls into default and allows for ROSCOM to stop providing services under that TSA as well. And so all this talks to the ability for ROSCOM to influence the decisions in the interim and ultimately until that debt has been disposed of and distributed to non-ROSCOM operations.
Mr. Katz, could you just repeat that clause for me, please?
I think it was 7.2 of the term agreement.
Please just give me one moment.
I can just repeat what we said. We have, so much money tied, in this investment that it's not our interest to trigger all this clause. We would just, shoot ourselves in the foot, and that's pretty trivial.
If it's not in your interest, then why'd you put it in?
Because that's just, you have to put an end. You have, this is a standard. You can't have just a loan that doesn't never expire. Then it becomes equity. I think if this was a term, when you would say this is equity, this is not debt.
But this clause, as well as the trigger on the TSA, the Technical Services Agreement, that basically says it stops as well at your discretion, gives a ROSCOM the ability to further influence if it chooses to. And all I'm looking at are these clauses that give you the opportunity to do it. I'm not saying you will do it, but it begs the question, if you're not going to do it, why would you put it in? If you're putting it to protect yourself, then it's there because you may decide to use it.
Mr. Vice Chairman, if I could perhaps assist, the clause in the lending agreement is a fairly routine and standard banking clause that you would find in any lending arrangement, and it provides that in the event of default, I think what Mr. Maruzo is saying is that it's very unlikely that ORSCOM would enforce that clause and would, in all likelihood, be looking at extending its the loan and eliminating the default.
Well, but those are the issues that I've got, so I'll leave that thought with you. It basically says the opportunity is there, and what we're looking at here is an interpretation of control in fact. And I'm saying these things lead one to suggest that there is recourse at some point in time whenever that default happens.
Well, Mr. Katz, if I could perhaps be a little more explicit than my friend the banking lawyer, this clause is what turns this agreement into a loan or an equity investment. Unless there was a possibility to take recourse against the borrower, it would be an equity investment. So it's a perfectly standard clause in any lending agreement. Without that, you wouldn't lend.
It may be a standard clause in any lending agreement. I don't dispute that. And if TELUS or Bell or Rogers went to a bank, I can understand that. But we're dealing here with a non-Canadian entity who's extended that funds with the recourse that he does have should he decide to use it. That's the difference.
Right, it is a loan. Yeah.
Can I make a clear point, please? It's very important that to clarify that there is no loan in the world without an end, without a date, and there is no loan without a default clause. So there's no other way to do it if we wanted to lend Globalive. If we wanted to put more equity, it's not allowed. So if you have, there is nobody's invented a third way. It's either equity or you make a loan with a deadline and recourse, So we are, again, it's very important to mention that, again, we had not intended to provide that loan. Should the economic crisis would have not occurred and should have been, the lending markets would have not dried up completely, and should we have found any other private equity Canadian investor that would have liked to join, we would have welcomed that, It is just important to see all the circumstances under which this loan is done. We have not done that in any of other operations. We don't usually like to provide shareholders loan because they reduce our return.
Mr. Katz, if we appreciate your point, and we'll take that away. I would say that these documents were drafted obviously in anticipation that there would be additional financing as well in the structure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sure there was. And to the same point, the TSA also falls into breach when the default happens as well. So basically, Mr. Campbell is left with no support at all on date certain whenever that default occurs. And I guess, sorry, was that also intended?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's helpful again to return to the context in which these agreements were entered into. The contemplated event of default that you're referring to and the provision for it in the TSA, both of those arose in a context where this was intended to be very short-term bridge financing. The points you've made are understood, and we'll take that under advisement. The context has changed.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little leery about getting into the next question. It has to do with vendor financing, and I think I'm going to wait till tomorrow for that because it also ties in to the ability for Globalive Wireless to actually fund and finance the debt and the vendor financing at some point in time as well. So we'll come back to those questions tomorrow.
Yes.
Those are all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Could I just make one remark, Mr. Katz? You had made a mention of business plans, and I think I understand that there were a few different plans filed in the various documents. If I was to preemptively steer you for tomorrow's discussion, the main document that I would like to talk to from a capital structure perspective, and obviously these things are works in progress and are always moving, but interrogatory 6.6-1 is probably our best one to talk to for financing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Menzies.
Thank you. I have a few questions relating to your presentation, to get clarity on, and then just touch on a couple of other things having to do with control and fact and corporate culture. Mr. Lacavera, you mentioned in your presentation, and you just mentioned it again, that you searched high and low for partners in this, and this was in the context of your talking about relative experience. And in paragraph 10 of your presentation, the last sentence says, ultimately those fell through. Can you expand on that a little bit and help us understand why those fell through?
Yes. Mr. Menzies, I think there are a number of factors. When I looked at getting into the wireless business, definitely, immediately I recognized that I had to look outside of Canada for capital, and because I hadn't yet been in the wireless business, I felt operational expertise was critically important as well. And then, of course, the fact that the incumbents are entrenched in the marketplace in Canada, and I've had 10 years of having fun competing with them in various niche markets, I recognize the need for this to be a very large financing, and probably most importantly with respect to that, staying power, ability to go through ups and downs like any business has. I had discussions with AAL's team, Bryce, Simon, and myself being the core team. We literally met with upwards of 50 different potential partners for this business. We talked to equity investors, institutional investors, we talked to banks, we talked to intermediaries, we talked to principals. And I spent an extensive amount of time literally around the world talking to parties on how this could be done. The regulatory framework is clearly a hurdle in Canada to bringing international investment, foreign investment. The market reality that there are three very well-run incumbents that have their own flanker brands makes it a competitive environment and their ability to move in the market. So all these factors led to it really coming down to the need to partner with someone who was an entrepreneur like myself, someone who has been successful in the wireless business and seen what can go right and what can go wrong in the wireless business, so that we don't trip ourselves up and make mistakes. And the ability to help bring a team to the table, in addition to to bolster my team. Ken, Bruno, being examples. Ken actually was brought by Michael O'Connor, and Ken actually introduced Bruno. So you can see how things go. This is not about OT bringing everything to the table. It's already much bigger than that. I don't think it was realistic to have gotten where we are today without partnering with someone who has the fortitude to go the distance in this market and go through what's going to be, the regulatory hurdles now, but now we're, with your blessing, we'll be through those. Now we have to actually launch a business and compete with the incumbents.
Well, are you saying that, just to try to make a long story short, are you saying that basically the entrepreneurial drive to invest in this sort of business and create competition, in your experience at least, didn't exist in Canada?
I could not find it, and again, I've been in the business for 10 years, and I talked to parties that are also entrepreneurs in Canada, and again, it's a very large proposition to get into wireless in Canada. So the answer is no, not in my relationships at the time. I'm very happy with the new partnership that I've formed with Naguib, and then obviously the OT team, and now the management team we have. I think that, as I said in my introductory, I've never worked for anyone. So actually this idea of OT controlling me didn't actually even occur to me until it was raised in this interrogatory process. I just have never had anyone, I've never, quite literally never had a job. I've always been starting businesses and building businesses. So this question of influence, I was able to find financing, which I think is incredible financing. The financing that OT has contributed, incredibly powerful financing for the market we're in today. And now things are improving, and we're continuing to have discussions about now third-party financing.
Hey, thank you.